"What was that?" one soldier shouted. They were coming back. Maya ran toward the old mill at the village's edge, her legs burning, her breath coming in gasps. She could hear them behind her, their heavy boots splashing through puddles. The mill stood dark and imposing against the stormy sky, its wooden water wheel creaking in the wind. Maya ducked inside just as a flashlight beam swept past where she'd been standing seconds before. Inside the mill, she climbed the old wooden ladder to the second floor, then did something unexpected. She climbed back down, grabbed a length of rope, and created a simple tripwire across the bottom of the ladder. Then she picked up several handfuls of old grain and scattered them on the floor near the entrance. In the beam of a flashlight, they would look like fresh footprints leading deeper into the mill. She climbed back up, found a shadowy corner, and waited. The soldiers entered cautiously, sweeping their lights across the interior. "There," one said, pointing at the grain trail. They followed it away from the ladder, moving toward the back of the mill. Maya seized her moment. She climbed down as silently as possible and slipped toward the entrance. But she'd underestimated them. One soldier had stayed behind as a guard, and now he stood between her and freedom, his weapon raised. For a long moment, they stared at each other. He was young, probably not much older than her, and she could see the surprise in his eyes. He'd been expecting armed rebels, not a soaking wet school teacher. "Please," Maya said softly in his language, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'm alone. I'm not a fighter. I just want to leave." She could see him hesitating, his finger on the trigger, wrestling with his orders and his conscience. Then came the sound she'd been hoping for, a crash and shouts of pain as the other soldiers hit her tripwire in the darkness. The young soldier's attention wavered for just a second, and Maya ran. She burst out of the mill and into the rain, not toward the road but up into the hills, where she knew every path and trail. Behind her, she heard shouting, but she didn't look back. She climbed higher, her lungs screaming, until she reached the old shepherd's cave her grandfather had shown her as a child. From there, she watched as dawn broke over the village. By 6:15 a.m., she saw them leaving, frustrated and empty-handed. Their radios were probably full of angry demands to explain why they'd found nothing, why they'd sent half their team on a wild chase, why their truck was disabled. Maya allowed herself a small smile. She'd done it. 1 civilian against 8 trained soldiers, and she'd won. As the last truck disappeared down the mountain road, Maya finally let herself breathe. Her hands were still shaking, but inside she felt something new, the knowledge that ordinary people, when pushed to their limits, could find extraordinary courage. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained for combat, but she protected her home using the only weapon she had, her knowledge, her cleverness, and her unwillingness to give up. Tomorrow she would rejoin the villagers and tell them it was safe to return. Tonight, she would rest, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come not from strength of arms, but from strength of spirit. The rain hammered down on the tin roof of the old farmhouse as Maya pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give away her position. It was 3:22 a.m., and somewhere in the darkness outside, 8 enemy soldiers were methodically searching every building in the village. She was just a school teacher, 26 years old, armed with nothing but her wits and an intimate knowledge of these hills she'd called home her entire life. The war had come to her doorstep uninvited, and now she had no choice but to face it. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Maya had been visiting her grandmother's farmhouse when she heard the trucks rumbling up the mountain road. Through the window, she watched them stop at the village entrance, and her blood ran cold when she recognized the insignia on their uniforms. These weren't regular soldiers. They were part of an elite reconnaissance unit, sent ahead to scout and secure the area before the main forces arrived. The villagers had fled hours ago after receiving word of the advancing army, but Maya had stayed behind to gather her grandmother's medicine. Now that decision might cost her everything. She heard boots crunching on gravel outside, growing closer. A voice called out in a language she barely understood, harsh and commanding. Maya's mind raced. The farmhouse had been her playground as a child, and she knew every crack in its walls, every loose floorboard, every secret it held. An idea sparked in her mind, dangerous but possible. She moved silently through the darkness toward the kitchen, where an old trapdoor led to the root cellar. But she didn't climb down. Instead, She opened it just wide enough to make it obvious, then scattered some of her grandmother's preserved jars nearby, letting one roll toward the opening. She needed them to think she was hiding below. The front door burst open with a crash that made her jump. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness like knives. Maya was already moving, slipping out the back door and into the rain. She circled around the building, staying low, her clothes soaked and clinging to her skin. Through the window, she could see 3 soldiers entering the house, their weapons raised, moving with the practiced efficiency of trained fighters. One of them spotted the open trapdoor immediately and gestured to the others. They approached it cautiously, and Maya held her breath as 2 of them descended into the cellar. That's when she made her move. Racing to their parked trucks, she found what she was looking for, a radio crackling with static and occasional transmissions. She'd learned basic radio operation in the village civil defense classes, never thinking she'd actually need it. Her hands trembling, she switched to their frequency and listened. A commander's voice was coordinating the search across multiple villages. Maya took a deep breath, disguised her voice to sound deeper, more masculine, and spoke in broken phrases of the enemy's language she'd picked up. Contact. Resistance fighters. Grid 7. Need backup immediately. She repeated it twice, then turned off the radio and ran. The effect was almost immediate. Within minutes, she heard shouting and saw soldiers emerging from buildings throughout the village, including the 3 from the farmhouse. They were regrouping, half of them rushing toward Grid 7, which Maya knew was a rocky area 2 miles east, a maze of boulders and dead ends. She'd cut their numbers in half with a single transmission. But she wasn't done yet. As the first group sped away in 2 trucks, Maya waited in the shadows of the old church, watching the remaining 4 soldiers take defensive positions. The squad leader was clearly frustrated, barking orders into his radio, trying to understand what was happening. Maya noticed something crucial. They'd left 1 truck behind, its engine still running. Another idea formed, more audacious than the first. She picked up a rock and threw it hard against the far side of the church. The sharp crack echoed through the village, and immediately 2 soldiers moved to investigate. Now there were only 2 left near the truck. Maya's pulse raced as she crept closer, using overturned market stalls and rain barrel for cover. She could hear one soldier complaining to another about the false alarm, about wanting to return to base. They had no idea a civilian was outsmarting them, turning their own tactics against them. Maya reached the truck and did something that would either save her or doom her. She slashed 3 of the tires with a knife from her pocket, the one she'd used earlier to cut vegetables for her grandmother's soup. The hissing of escaping air seemed impossibly loud.